The scorching desert sun beat down mercilessly on Penelope Kincaid's blistered skin as she pulled against the iron chains that bound her to the weathered wooden post, her parched lips cracking with each desperate cry for help that echoed across the empty landscape. Arizona Territory, 1877, 3 days. That's how long she had been there. 3 days without water, with only the thin cotton of her once pristine dress between her skin and the punishing sun. Her throat was raw from screaming, her wrists bloody from struggling against the unyielding iron. The man who had left her there, her so-called fiancé, Richard Dawson, was long gone, along with her family's money, her dignity, and any hope she had left. Penelope had stopped crying sometime during the second day, when there were no more tears left to shed. Now she drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind playing cruel tricks on her. She imagined cool water, shade, and the comforting touch of her mother's hand on her forehead. But when her bleary eyes opened, there was only endless desert, the distant mountains shimmering in the heat. She had almost given up hope when she saw the dust cloud on the horizon. At first, she thought it was another mirage, like the dozens she had seen before. But the cloud grew larger, more defined, and soon she could make out the silhouette of a rider. "Help!" she tried to call, but her voice was barely a whisper. She summoned her remaining strength and rattled her chains, praying the sound would carry across the barren landscape. Thomas Hartwell had been tracking a pair of cattle rustlers for 3 days when he spotted something unusual in the distance. At first, he thought it might be a broken wagon or abandoned supplies, not uncommon in this unforgiving territory. But as he drew closer, squinting against the harsh light, he realized with a jolt that it was a woman. He spurred his horse forward, covering the distance in a gallop. As he approached, he could see she was chained to a post that had been driven deep into the hard desert floor. Her dress was torn and filthy, her skin angry red from sun exposure, her dark hair matted with dust. Thomas dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his boots hitting the ground with a thud. He approached cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. In his 10 years as a cowboy, and the last 5 running his own modest ranch, he had seen many cruelties, but nothing like this. "Madam, can you hear me?" he asked, kneeling beside her. Penelope's head lifted slightly at the sound of his voice. Through cracked eyelids, she saw a tall figure silhouetted against the sun. For a moment, she thought death had finally come for her, dressed as a cowboy. "Water," she managed to whisper. Thomas quickly uncorked his canteen and held it to her lips. "Slow now," he cautioned as she gulped desperately. "Too much at once will make you sick." She nodded weakly, forcing herself to take small sips. The water was warm, but it was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. "Who did this to you?" Thomas asked, his voice tight with controlled anger as he examined the chains. "Richard Dawson," she whispered between sips. "My fiancé." "Former fiancé." Thomas's jaw clenched. He had heard of Dawson, a smooth-talking businessman from back east who had arrived in the territory a few months ago, talking about investments and opportunities. Apparently, his business methods included leaving women to die in the desert. "I'm going to get you out of here," he said, standing up and moving to his saddlebag. He returned with a set of metal tools. "These chains look solid, but the lock is simple. I can pick it." As he worked on the lock, Penelope studied him through her haze of pain and dehydration. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. A dark beard covered his jaw, and his hands, though large and calloused, worked with surprising gentleness on her chains. "I'm Thomas Hartwell," he said, concentrating on the lock. "I have a small ranch about half a day's ride from here." "Penelope Kincaid," she replied, her voice slightly stronger now that she had some water. "I came west from Boston with my father. He died of fever 2 months ago. Richard was supposed to be my protector." The lock finally gave way with a click, and the chains fell away from her wrists. Penelope tried to stand, but immediately collapsed. Thomas caught her before she hit the ground. "Easy now," he said, supporting her weight. "You're in no condition to walk." He helped her to the shade of a nearby boulder and gave her more water, along with some jerky from his provisions. While she ate, he examined her wrists, cleaning the raw skin as gently as he could with a cloth dampened from his canteen. "Why would he do this?" Thomas asked, his voice low and controlled, but Penelope could hear the anger beneath it. "My father left me everything," she explained, her voice gaining strength. "Our home in Boston, his business investments, a substantial amount in the bank. Richard was his business partner. After father died, Richard convinced me that we should marry and move west to start a new life. He said he would invest my inheritance in land and cattle." She laughed bitterly. "3 days ago, he brought me out here, chained me to that post, and told me he would be taking my money and returning east without the burden of a wife." Thomas's hands stilled for a moment. "And he just left you here to die?" Penelope nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "He said no one would find me, that the coyotes would have my bones picked clean within a week." Thomas finished tending to her wrists and moved to check her ankles, which were also raw from where she had been bound. "Well, he was wrong about that," he said. "I found you, and once you're recovered, we'll find him."
"How?"
Penelope asked, her voice catching. "He could be anywhere by now." "The stage to Tucson only runs twice a week," Thomas said. "And the eastbound train from there runs even less frequently. If he's carrying a large sum of money, he'll leave a trail. First, though, we need to get you somewhere safe." The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Thomas built a small fire, then prepared a simple meal of beans and coffee. Penelope ate gratefully, feeling strength slowly returning to her limbs. "We'll camp here tonight," Thomas said, laying out his bedroll for her. "You're in no condition to travel, and it would be dangerous to move through this territory in the dark. We'll head for my ranch at first light." Penelope nodded, suddenly overcome by exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered as he helped her onto the bedroll. "I thought I was going to die out here." Thomas's expression softened. "Get some rest, Miss Kincaid. You're safe now." As Penelope drifted into sleep, Thomas sat by the fire, his rifle across his knees, keeping watch. He studied her face in the firelight even beneath the sunburn and exhaustion. He could see she was beautiful. More than that, though, he sensed a strength in her that had helped her survive an ordeal that would have killed many. His thoughts turned dark as he considered what he would do when he found Richard Dawson. Thomas wasn't a violent man by nature, but the thought of someone leaving a woman to die such a slow, painful death filled him with a cold rage he had rarely experienced. For now, though, his priority was getting Penelope to safety. Tomorrow would be soon enough to start hunting the man who had tried to kill her. The night passed without incident, and Thomas woke Penelope just as the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. He helped her to her feet, pleased to see that she could stand, though shakily. "Do you think you can ride?" he asked, eyeing his horse doubtfully. "It's a long walk to my ranch." Penelope nodded determinedly. "I can ride. My father taught me when I was young, though it's been some time." Thomas helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. He was acutely aware of her body pressed against his, but he pushed aside any improper thoughts. This woman had been through a terrible ordeal and needed his protection, not his attention. They rode east as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Penelope leaned against Thomas's chest, drawing strength from his solid presence. Despite her circumstances, she found herself noticing the way his arms encircled her as he held the reins, the clean scent of him beneath the dust and sweat of the trail, the gentle way he occasionally asked if she was comfortable. By midday, they crested a small rise, and Thomas pointed to a cluster of buildings in the distance. That's my place, he said. It's not much, but it's home. As they approached, Penelope could see a modest but well-maintained ranch house, a large barn, several corrals, and a bunkhouse. A few cowboys were visible, working with cattle in the nearest corral. One of the men looked up as they approached and waved. "Boss, wasn't expecting you back so soon." His friendly expression changed to concern as he noticed Penelope. "Everything all right?" Thomas dismounted and helped Penelope down. "Frank, this is Miss Penelope Kincaid. She's had a rough time. Miss Kincaid, this is Frank Miller, my foreman." Frank tipped his hat respectfully. "Madam, Miss Kincaid needs rest and care," Thomas continued. "Can you ask Mrs. Reynolds to prepare a room and maybe draw a bath?" "Of course, boss," Frank said, hurrying toward the house. Thomas turned to Penelope. "Mrs. Reynolds is my housekeeper. She'll take good care of you." He offered his arm for support, and they made their way slowly to the house. A plump, motherly woman met them at the door, her face a picture of concern as she took in Penelope's condition. "Oh, you poor dear," she exclaimed. Come in, come in. I've got a bath being drawn right now, and I'll find you some clean clothes. You look about my daughter's size." Penelope turned to Thomas. "I don't know how to thank you." His blue eyes met hers. "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone. Most would have ridden past or—" She couldn't finish the thought. Thomas understood. In this harsh territory, a lone woman was vulnerable to all manner of dangers. "You're safe here," he assured her. "Rest and recover. We can talk more later." With that, he turned her over to Mrs. Reynolds's capable hands and went to confer with his foreman. There was a cattle rustler to catch, and now a scoundrel named Richard Dawson to find as well. The next week passed in a blur for Penelope. The first few days, she did little but sleep, eat the nourishing meals Mrs. Reynolds prepared, and slowly regain her strength. The housekeeper tended to her sunburned skin with soothing salves and supplied her with simple but clean dresses that had belonged to her daughter, now married and living in California. Thomas visited her room daily, always knocking respectfully and entering only when invited. He brought her books from his modest library and sat with her, telling her about his ranch and the territory. Penelope found herself looking forward to these visits, drawn to his quiet strength and integrity. On the 8th day, Penelope felt strong enough to venture downstairs. She found Thomas at his desk in the small study, poring over account books. He looked up as she entered, a smile lighting his face. "Miss Kincaid, it's good to see you up and about." "Please call me Penelope," she said, taking a seat across from him. "After all you've done for me, formality seems unnecessary." Thomas nodded. "Penelope, then. And you must call me Thomas." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Finally, Penelope spoke. "I need to know what happened to Richard. Has there been any word?" Thomas's expression darkened. "I've made inquiries. He was seen boarding the stage to Tucson last week, which means he's probably on a train heading east by now. I've sent telegrams to the authorities in several cities describing him and the circumstances, but the law often moves slowly, if at all." Penelope finished for him. She had seen enough of the frontier to know that justice here was often a matter of personal resolution rather than legal proceedings. "Yes," Thomas admitted. "And without witnesses other than yourself, it might be difficult to prove what he did." Penelope nodded, accepting this harsh reality. "What about my father's money? Is there any way to recover it?" Thomas hesitated. "That would be even more difficult, I'm afraid, if he's converted it to cash or drafts in his name." "I understand," Penelope said quietly. She stared out the window for a long moment, then turned back to Thomas with determination in her eyes. "Then I must find a way to support myself. I can't impose on your hospitality indefinitely." "You're not imposing," Thomas said quickly. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. That's very kind, but I need to rebuild my life, Penelope insisted. I have some skills. I can read and write well. I kept my father's accounts in Boston. Perhaps there's a position in town I could apply for? Thomas considered this. The nearest town is Silver Creek, about 10 miles from here. It's small but growing. There might be opportunities there. He paused. But there's no rush. You're still recovering. Penelope smiled gratefully. Thank you. But I'd like to at least visit the town soon. I need to feel useful again. The next day, Thomas arranged for the ranch wagon to take them into Silver Creek. Penelope wore one of Mrs. Reynolds's daughter's dresses, simple but clean, with her hair neatly pinned up. Despite the lingering redness of her sunburn, she looked like a proper Eastern lady. Silver Creek proved to be a typical frontier town, one main street lined with a general store, a bank, a saloon, a small hotel, and various other establishments. People glanced curiously at Penelope as Thomas helped her down from the wagon. First, let's visit the general store, Thomas suggested. Mrs. Peterson might know of any opportunities for employment. The store was a treasure trove of goods, from practical necessities to small luxuries imported from the East. Mrs. Peterson, a thin woman with kind eyes, greeted Thomas warmly. Mr. Hartwell, always a pleasure. And who might this be? She asked, eyeing Penelope with friendly curiosity. Mrs. Peterson, this is Miss Penelope Kincaid, a friend from back east who's staying at my ranch for a time, Thomas said smoothly, avoiding the true circumstances of their meeting. She's looking for employment in town. Mrs. Peterson's face lit up. Well, isn't that a coincidence? Just yesterday, Dr. Wilson was saying he needs someone with good handwriting and a head for figures to help with his records and correspondence. He's getting on in years, and his eyes aren't what they used to be. Penelope felt a surge of hope. I would be very interested in such a position, she said earnestly. My father was a businessman, and I assisted him with all his correspondence and accounts. Dr. Wilson's office is just down the street, Mrs. Peterson said. He should be there now, unless he's out on a call. They thanked her and continued down the street to a small building with a sign reading, Dr. James Wilson, physician. Inside, they found an elderly man with white hair and spectacles, struggling to read a medical journal. Thomas Hartwell, the doctor exclaimed, standing to shake his hand. No broken bones or bullet wounds today, I hope? Thomas laughed. Not today, document. I'm here to introduce Miss Penelope Kincaid. Mrs. Peterson mentioned you might be looking for someone to help with your records and correspondence. Dr. Wilson peered at Penelope over his spectacles. Indeed I am. These old eyes aren't what they once were. Can you read and write clearly, young lady? Yes, sir, Penelope replied. I was educated at Miss Porter's school in Connecticut and helped manage my father's business correspondence for several years. Dr. Wilson looked impressed. Eastern education? That's more than I hoped for. Can you start tomorrow? The pay isn't much, but it's honest work. Penelope glanced at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, sir. I can start tomorrow. Excellent. Come at 9 o'clock and we'll get you settled. The doctor turned to Thomas. You'll bring her in? Of course, Thomas agreed. And I can arrange transportation back and forth until she finds lodging in town. As they left the doctor's office, Penelope felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had a position, a way to earn money and rebuild her life. She would not be dependent on Thomas's charity forever. Thank you, she said as they walked back to the wagon. For everything. Thomas smiled down at her. You've nothing to thank me for. You're the one doing all the hard work of rebuilding. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the town. Thomas introduced her to the banker, the sheriff, and several other prominent citizens, always referring to her as Miss Kincaid from Boston, without explaining the circumstances that had brought her to the territory. By the time they returned to the ranch, Penelope was exhausted, but filled with a new sense of purpose. She had survived Richard's betrayal. She would not just survive, but thrive in this new place. Over the next few weeks, Penelope settled into a routine. Thomas, or one of his ranch hands, would drive her to town each morning and pick her up in the evening. Dr. Wilson proved to be a kind employer, and Penelope quickly organized his chaotic records and correspondence into an efficient system. The doctor was so pleased that he increased her salary after just 2 weeks. In the evenings, she would join Thomas for dinner, and they would talk about their days. Sometimes they would sit on the porch afterward, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Penelope found herself looking forward to these quiet moments together, enjoying Thomas's company in a way she had never enjoyed Richard's. Where Richard had been all flash and charm, Thomas was steady and genuine. Where Richard had made grand promises, Thomas simply kept his word. And where Richard had seen her primarily as a means to wealth, Thomas seemed to value her for herself. One evening, about a month after Penelope had started working for Dr. Wilson, they were sitting on the porch when Thomas cleared his throat nervously. "I've been thinking," he said, "that it might be more practical for you to have lodging in town. The daily trips back and forth take time, and winter will be here before we know it, making travel more difficult." Penelope felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. "Are you asking me to leave?" "No," Thomas said quickly. "Not at all. I just thought it might be more convenient for you. Mrs. Reynolds has enjoyed having another woman in the house, and he paused. "I've enjoyed your company very much." Penelope smiled, relieved. "I've enjoyed yours as well. More than I can say. But you're right that the arrangement is somewhat impractical. There's a small house for rent near Dr. Wilson's office," Thomas continued. "It belonged to the previous schoolteacher, who married and moved to California. It's modest, but in good repair." "That sounds ideal," Penelope said. "I should have enough saved for the first month's rent by next week." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "I would be happy to help with the initial costs. Consider it a loan if you prefer." Penelope considered this. Her pride wanted to refuse, but practicality won out. "A loan, then?" "I'll repay you as soon as I'm able." The next day, they went to look at the house. It was indeed small, just 2 rooms, a combined kitchen and living area, and a bedroom, but it was clean and sturdy, with a small garden out back. The rent was reasonable, and the landlord, impressed by her position with Dr. Wilson, agreed to let her move in the following week. Mrs. Reynolds helped Penelope prepare for the move, giving her linens, kitchenware, and other household necessities. "These are extras we have around the house," she insisted when Penelope protested the generosity. "And it does my heart good to help a young woman set up her own home." The day of the move came, and Thomas personally drove the wagon loaded with Penelope's few possessions into town. They spent the morning arranging furniture and unpacking, working together with an easy companionship that made the time fly by. By midday, the small house was transformed into a cozy home. Penelope stood in the middle of the main room, looking around with satisfaction. "It's perfect," she said. "My first home of my own." Thomas watched her, a warm expression in his eyes. "You've come a long way from that post in the desert." Penelope moved closer to him. "Thanks to you." "No," he said seriously. "Thanks to your own strength and determination. Many would have given up after what you went through." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Penelope thought he might kiss her. But Thomas stepped back, breaking the spell. "I should head back to the ranch. There's plenty to do before sundown." "Of course," Penelope said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Will I see you Sunday at church?" Thomas nodded. "I'll be there. And if you need anything before then, just send word with anyone heading out to the ranch." After he left, Penelope sat in her new home, surrounded by the silence. For the first time since her ordeal in the desert, she was truly alone. She had thought she would welcome the independence, but instead, she found herself missing Thomas's steady presence. She had not expected to develop feelings for the cowboy who had rescued her. After Richard's betrayal, she had vowed to guard her heart carefully. But Thomas was different from any man she had known, honorable, kind, and without pretense. She found herself thinking of him constantly, looking forward to their next meeting with an anticipation that went beyond mere friendship. Sunday couldn't come soon enough. Penelope dressed carefully in her best dress, one she had purchased with her own earnings, and walked to the small church at the end of town. She arrived early, taking a seat near the back, her eyes constantly darting to the door. Thomas arrived just before the service began, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best, a clean shirt, pressed trousers, and a string tie. He spotted her immediately and made his way to her pew, nodding politely to the other congregants as he passed. "Miss Kincaid," he greeted her formally, mindful of their surroundings. "May I join you?" "Please do, Mr. Hartwell," she replied with equal formality, though her heart raced at his proximity. Throughout the service, Penelope was acutely aware of Thomas beside her. Their shoulders occasionally brushed as they stood for hymns, and once, when they both reached for the same hymnal, their hands touched briefly, sending a jolt of awareness through her. After the service, they joined the other congregants for coffee and cake in the churchyard. Several people came to greet Penelope, who was becoming a familiar and respected figure in the small community. Dr. Wilson boasted to anyone who would listen about how efficiently she had organized his practice. "You've made quite an impression," Thomas observed as they walked away from the church. "People here respect hard work and resilience." "And you?" Penelope asked, feeling bold. "What do you respect, Thomas?" He looked at her thoughtfully. "Honesty, courage, kindness." He paused. "All qualities you possess in abundance." Penelope felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "Would you like to come to my home for dinner?" she asked impulsively. "I'm not the cook Mrs. Reynolds is, but I can manage a decent meal." Thomas hesitated, and Penelope immediately regretted the invitation. It was too forward, too presumptuous. "I'd be honored," he said finally. "Shall I come around 5? Relief flooded through her. 5 would be perfect. The rest of the afternoon was a flurry of preparation. Penelope went to the general store for supplies, then spent hours cooking a simple but hearty meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and apple pie for dessert. She set her small table with her best dishes and even splurged on a small bunch of wildflowers from a local girl who sold them on Sundays. At precisely 5 o'clock, there was a knock at her door. Thomas stood on her porch, looking freshly shaved and slightly nervous, holding a small package. "Come in," Penelope said, suddenly shy. "Dinner is almost ready." Thomas entered, looking around appreciatively. "You've made this place your own," he observed. "It feels like a home." "Thank you," Penelope said, pleased by his approval. "It's small, but it suits me." Thomas handed her the package. A small housewarming gift. Penelope unwrapped it carefully to find a beautiful leather-bound journal. "Thomas, it's lovely," she said, running her fingers over the soft leather. "I noticed you writing in the evening sometimes," he explained. "Your previous journal looked nearly full." Penelope was touched that he had noticed such a detail. "Thank you. This is perfect." Dinner was a success. The food turned out well, and conversation flowed easily between them. Thomas told her stories of his early days as a cowboy, and Penelope shared memories of her childhood in Boston. They discovered shared interests in books and music, and a similar outlook on many aspects of life. As the evening progressed, Penelope found herself relaxing completely in his company. This was nothing like her courtship with Richard, which had been full of grand gestures and flowery compliments, but somehow always left her feeling as though she was performing a role rather than being herself. With Thomas, she could simply be Penelope, not the proper Boston heiress, not the abandoned fiancé, not the woman chained to a post in the desert. Just herself, with all her strengths and flaws. After dinner, they sat by the fire, cups of coffee in hand. A comfortable silence fell between them. "Penelope," Thomas said finally, his voice unusually hesitant. "There's something I should tell you." She looked at him curiously. "What is it?" "I received a telegram yesterday from the sheriff in Denver. Richard Dawson has been arrested." Penelope nearly dropped her cup. "Arrested? For what?" "For fraud, initially. Apparently, he tried a similar scheme with another woman there. But when they searched his belongings, they found a journal in which he detailed what he did to you." Thomas's jaw tightened. He wrote about it as if it were some clever business maneuver, not attempted murder. Penelope set down her cup, her hands suddenly unsteady. "So he'll be punished?" "The sheriff says they're charging him with attempted murder. They want you to testify, but given the evidence in his own handwriting, they're confident of a conviction even if you choose not to." Penelope sat back, a tumult of emotions washing over her. Relief that Richard would face justice. Anger at the reminder of what he had done. And beneath it all, a sense of closure. "I'll testify," she said firmly. "I want to look him in the eye when he's sentenced." Thomas nodded, respect evident in his expression. "I thought you might say that. The trial won't be for a few months yet, but when the time comes, I'll accompany you to Denver." "You don't have to do that," Penelope protested, though secretly she was relieved at the offer. "I want to," Thomas said simply. "I was there when you were found. It seems right that I should be there when the man responsible faces justice." Penelope looked at him, this steady, honorable man who had become so important to her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Thomas set down his cup and moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. "Penelope," he said, his voice low and serious, "I need to tell you something else." Her heart raced at his proximity. "Yes. These past weeks, getting to know you, they've been the happiest of my life." He took a deep breath. "I find myself thinking about you constantly. Wondering what you're doing, hoping you're happy. I know it might be too soon after everything you've been through, but I couldn't let another day pass without telling you how I feel." Penelope's breath caught in her throat. "And how do you feel, Thomas?" His eyes, so blue and earnest, met hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Penelope Kincaid." "No, that's not right. I have fallen in love with you. Completely and irrevocably." Joy blossomed in Penelope's chest, so intense it was almost painful. "Oh, Thomas," she whispered, "I've fallen in love with you too. I tried not to. After Richard, I was so afraid to trust anyone. But you. You're nothing like him. You're good and kind and honest." Thomas reached out tentatively, cupping her cheek in his calloused hand. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. In answer, Penelope leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a gentle, tender kiss that quickly deepened into something more passionate. Penelope felt as though she were melting into him, all the fear and hurt of the past months dissolving in the warmth of his embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "It's getting late, and your reputation." Penelope nodded, though she hated to see him leave. "When will I see you again?" "Tomorrow," Thomas promised. "I'll come to town on the pretext of business, but really just to see you." He stood, and Penelope walked him to the door. They shared one more brief kiss before he stepped out into the night. Penelope watched until he disappeared down the dark street, her heart fuller than she had ever thought possible. Over the next few months, their courtship progressed with a proper blend of restraint and genuine passion. Thomas came to town several times a week, and on Sundays, Penelope would often accompany him back to the ranch for dinner with Mrs. Reynolds, who watched their blooming romance with undisguised approval. In October, they traveled together to Denver for Richard's trial. Penelope testified with dignity and clarity, describing her ordeal without flinching. Richard, once so handsome and charming, looked diminished in his prison clothes, unable to meet her gaze as she identified him. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning a guilty verdict. The judge sentenced Richard to 20 years in the territorial prison, a harsh but just punishment for his crimes. As they left the courthouse, Penelope felt as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "It's truly over now," she said, taking Thomas's arm. "I can look forward, not back." Thomas squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you. You faced him with such courage." That night, in the privacy of their hotel dining room, Thomas had a surprise for her. After their meal, he dropped to one knee beside her chair, a small velvet box in his hand. "Penelope Kincaid," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. You've shown me what true strength and grace look like. You've made my house feel like a home whenever you visit. I can't imagine my life without you in it." He opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful diamond ring. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy filled Penelope's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Thomas, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. They were married a month later in the Silver Creek Church, with the entire town turning out to witness the union of the respected rancher and the brave Eastern lady who had overcome such adversity. Mrs. Reynolds wept openly as they exchanged vows, and even Dr. Wilson dabbed at his eyes during the ceremony. After a brief honeymoon in San Francisco, Penelope's first glimpse of the Pacific Ocean, they returned to Thomas's ranch, now their ranch. Penelope threw herself into learning ranch management with the same determination she had shown in rebuilding her life. She kept the books with meticulous precision, introduced new breeding stock that improved their herd, and won the respect of even the most skeptical cowboys with her willingness to learn and her clear-headed business sense. A year after their wedding, Penelope gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Zara. 2 years later came a son, Zachary. Both children thrived in the healthy desert air, growing strong and independent under their parents' loving guidance. As the years passed, the Hartwell Ranch prospered and expanded. Thomas and Penelope built a larger home to accommodate their growing family, but they kept the original ranch house just as it was, as a reminder of where their journey together had begun. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Penelope with a special gift, the deed to a small parcel of land that included the spot where he had found her chained to that post. He had purchased it secretly and had a small monument erected, not to commemorate her suffering, but to celebrate her survival and strength. "This is where our story began," he told her as they stood beside the simple stone marker, "where I found the woman who would change my life forever." Penelope leaned into his embrace, thinking of all they had shared in the decade since that desperate day. "It's strange to think that the worst day of my life led to the best years I could have imagined," she said. "If Richard hadn't left me here to die, we might never have met." Thomas tightened his arms around her. "I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be." As the sun set over the desert, painting the landscape in gold and crimson, Penelope thought about the journey that had brought her here, from privileged Boston girl to abandoned fiancé to rancher's wife and mother. Each step, even the painful ones, had shaped her into the woman she was now. "I love you, Thomas Hartwell," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "Thank you for cutting me free and giving me a new life." He smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening, lines earned from years of squinting in the sun, from laughter, from a life fully lived. "I love you, Penelope Hartwell. Thank you for sharing that life with me." Their lips met in a kiss as tender and passionate as their first, 10 years earlier. Around them, the desert stretched vast and beautiful, witness to their enduring love story, a story that had begun with cruelty but blossomed into something rare and precious. As they rode home together, Penelope thought of their children waiting at the ranch, of the years stretching ahead, of all the joy still to come. The desert that had once nearly claimed her life was now her home, its harsh beauty a daily reminder of her own resilience. And the cowboy who had cut her free from those chains had given her not just rescue, but a love beyond anything she could have imagined. Sometimes, she reflected, the greatest blessings come disguised as our darkest moments. And sometimes, true love arrives not with grand gestures and flowery words, but with a canteen of water, a simple tool to break chains, and the steady, unwavering heart of a good man. The end.